Vice President Joe Biden pushing House Democrats hard on gun control. Biden telling members attending the Democratic Party retreat that he is steadfast in his belief that the federal government can declare your guns illegal.
It's recognized without a doubt now from last time. It is clearly within the power of the government to determine what type of weapons can be owned by the public.
By the public. By the public. Not the citizenry, huh? Well, some would argue that the Constitution specifically prohibits and limits the government, but it appears this administration is intent on infringing on our rights to keep and bear arms. Joining us now to assess all of this, criminal defense attorney, Fox News contributor, Arthur Aidala, attorney, former criminal prosecutor, Faith Jenkins. Good to have you both here. Can you believe that the Vice President of the United States just relegated all of us to just being members of the public rather than citizens? I mean, extraordinary language.
I took that to mean members of the American citizenry. Oh. So I didn't really make a distinction like you did, Lou.
Well, I just wondered why the Vice President made a distinction.
Well, I think it was just a matter of speech. I didn't really take any.
So it sounds as you so generously interpret the Vice President that you might agree with his view.
Well, I think that.
Disabuse me of my impression.
Well, I think he's right to a certain extent. I mean, let's look at what the Supreme Court said in Hiller about the Second Amendment. Remember what Justice Scalia said? He said that the Second Amendment doesn't mean you have the right to bear any kind, you can't carry around any types of weapons at any given time, whenever you want. So there are limits. And I think that's what the Vice President was saying.
Well, first of all, let's say that Vice President Biden may be known for a lot of things. His oratory skills, I would say, is at the top of the list. So him using public citizenry, he actually uttered some phrase before that didn't make any sense in the English language. So be that as it may,
we take what is comprehensible.
Yeah, exactly. You just get here's the case law. Speaking as a lawyer, putting politics aside, Justice Scalia, and I would say Scalia and Biden probably aren't on the same page too often. Right. So Scalia said it's the law of the land that everyone's entitled to possess a weapon. Okay, but that and then Alito had to come in a couple of years later and say every state. This applies to under the due process clause to every state. However, they said the states can regulate it. So what they can't say, Lou, is you're entitled to have a weapon, but you can't have an F-14 fighter plane in your backyard. You can't have a bazooka. Yeah. You can't have a hand grenade.
Yeah, but the case was about, I believe, handguns.
It was about handguns.
And the president and Dianne Feinstein are all talking about now suddenly handguns as well. It was also ruled in Chicago with one of the toughest, if not the toughest, surviving handgun law. Enough already. Everybody gets straight. This government is not going to be telling the American people what to do so long as we are possessed of a Second Amendment. And I've got to say to you, what is the difference here? If now the government can start to encroach on the Second, the Fourth, the 14th, the First, where does it end? Well, and because basically you've got to.
That could get us into our next conversation about the drones, because that
goes
all over.
That's where I'm headed.
The Constitution was basically.
This is the same administration that is sending out drones. And by the way, no one hates a radical Islamist terrorist more than I do.
Right.
And wants to kill them more than I do. But if that person is an American citizen, I do not want their rights suspended. I want a judicial proceeding, and I want a finding in order to kill that person. Because, I mean, it's crazy what they're doing.
I understand that, but the argument from the government right now is that may slow down the process in catching these people. The standard is, I mean, we've heard a couple of factors that they're considering. This person has to be a person of an imminent threat, and catching them is not feasible. If they are acting
against the interests of the United States, and they are injuring Americans or America, they die. Very simple. But we're talking about those instances where there is not a judicial proceeding, where there could well be. We are talking about instances that are not imminent. And I don't understand. And let me put this in context for folks who are going to have a knee-jerk reaction to this, perhaps. Jenna Napolitano's Department of Homeland Security in 2011 issued a report on the potential threat of terrorism, in this instance, right-wing extremism, which was categorized as military veterans, people who are pro-life, people who support states' rights, or are against illegal immigration as potential terrorists, they would be within that very same process because they would be acting against, in the judgment of a few, the interests of the United States, an imminent threat. Are you kidding me? These are the kind of people we're going to give that kind of power to solely, and you know.
Well, obviously, it's very scary. I mean, when you start talking about people on the mainland and being classified as terrorists, and we could go after them without due process, which is the foundation of this country. I think the balancing test that whoever's in charge of the military and making these decisions are, Lou, do we put 25 young men, Americans, their lives at risk to go capture this one American overseas and bring him back here to face our justice system? What about the criticism that we would get?
I'm not suggesting that.
Okay, so how do we get him? How do we stop him?
I am suggesting that there is a judicial proceeding.
But how do we get him to bring him to the judicial proceeding?
We're just going to slow down the process, though. And these are people.
I mean, you're right.
I want to slow down the
capture.
process. Let me say, I want to slow it down. You just watched a hearing in Washington, D.C., in which the secretary, no longer, but the former Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, admitted that the Secretary of State wasn't even engaged during the attack on Benghazi, that we didn't respond urgently and forthwith. To his credit, Senator Lindsey Graham brought out, I thought, extraordinary testimony in which, not knowing how long it would take, they didn't even respond to save the lives of 4 Americans. And you're going to give the same people the power to execute an American?
You're right.
Without a process?
It should never be done.
This is a hollow and absolutely incompetent.
So if you did it,
leadership.
Let's just say it's a self-defense thing. If you did it and you killed, like Trayvon Martin in Florida, right? He's saying I was justified to kill this person, this American.
In self-defense. It's an entirely different theory.
Well, it's kind of the same, except the difference is the defendant, Zimmerman, he's got to prove that it was self-defense. Here, the government doesn't have to prove to anyone. They're just saying
none of us want to have to deal with this thing out in the open and out in the daylight. We want the CIA, our intelligence agencies, our paramilitary to handle this.
Right.
We don't want idiots. Let me rephrase that. We do not want interference from those who are otherwise better occupied in other offices, intruding, because effectively end up working against the United States. But I don't want the president involved in that. I just do not want that political office, because we have a different world now. We have political offices within the White House. It's politics and it's governance, and by God, on any day you can't tell which is preeminent in their concerns, right?
Yeah, but
Republican or Democrat.
Isn't that why the president gets the big money, though, to be involved in those decisions?
I mean, I think the concern is going to be the timing in capturing individuals who are evasive and who have been determined to be people who oppose an imminent threat. And I think that's what we're talking about here with these drone strikes. I mean, ideally, yes, every person should
every
be
citizen in this country should be very comfortable with the idea that drones are flying over our houses.
No, absolutely not. It's
that's
not
what's
the ideal.
happening.
This is the exception.
That's what's
this is
happening.
Like the extreme, like this is the worst case
do we
scenario.
No longer have any rights?
Okay, so Luke, may I turn to
no longer a free society?
What do you think at this point should be the ramifications of that decision?
I just said it, and I'll keep saying it. I still think, as an American citizen, you're entitled to.
I know, but now that they breached that, now that they blew the guy away without his due process, what should happen?
I don't know which guy you're talking about.
The drone,
who are you talking about?
The American citizen that was killed.
Yeah, well, I wish we had time to adjudicate it here. But I want attorneys in this country representing we members of the public who prefer to be called citizens, representing our rights and insisting on law and order, because what is transpiring here is not lawful.
Correct.
It is not
they
the
put
American.
The Constitution aside.
No, we are becoming something other than Americans when we engage in this nonsense. And I really think it's time for both parties to understand it's time to clean up our thinking and our conduct, and especially that of our government. Thank you both.
Dobbs 2016.
Arthur Idala, Faith Jenkins. Coming up next week. Please, more.